Top of the morning and welcome to our special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. It's 586 days of the conflict, and the regional governor of Ukraine's southern region of Kherson, Alexander Prokudin, says that Russian shelling in the area has killed at least one person and injured 6 others, including 2 children. Mr. Prokudin said at least 71 attacks were recorded in the past 24 hours, aimed at the residential districts as well as shops and medical infrastructure across the region. He says at least 20 of the air and land attacks targeted the city of Kherson itself. Dozens of mourners have gathered in Moscow and other Russian cities to commemorate Wagner's chief Yevgeny Prigozhin, who died in a plane crash 40 days ago. In Orthodox Christian tradition, the 40th day after death is when a soul makes its final journey to either heaven or hell. Images posted in Wagner's recruitment arm on the Telegram app showed fighters and common citizens paying their respect at memorials. The leader of Russia's Wagner mercenary group was killed in an unexplained plane crash exactly 40 days ago. The private Embraer jet on which Prigozhin was traveling to St. Petersburg crashed north of Moscow, killing all 10 people on board on August the 23rd, including 2 other top Wagner figures, Prigozhin's 4 bodyguards, and a crew of 3. It's still unclear what caused the plane to crash 2 months to the day since Prigozhin's failed mutiny. The Kremlin said on August the 30th that investigators were considering the possibility that the plane was downed on purpose. At memorials in Moscow and other Russian cities, dozens of Wagner fighters and ordinary Russians paid their respects. Though there was no mass outpouring of grief, Russian state television was silent. Prigozhin's mutiny posed the biggest challenge to President Vladimir Putin's rule since the former KGB spy rose to power in 1999. Western diplomats say it exposed the strains on Russia of its war in Ukraine. Meanwhile, traffic on Kiev's Maidan Square came to a standstill on Sunday morning as Ukrainians all over the country paid tribute to killed soldiers on the newly introduced Defenders Day. People laid flowers and planted flags with names of fallen family members on the Maidan, Ukraine's Independence Square. Northwest of Kiev, families paid tribute to their fallen husbands and sons in the town of Bucha, occupied by Russian troops at the beginning of their full-scale invasion and scene of alleged Russian war atrocities. U.S. President Joe Biden on Sunday suggested that Democrats have made a deal with Republicans on support for Ukraine after the U.S. Congress left aid for Kiev out of a stopgap government spending bill that averted a shutdown. Mr. Biden asked at a press conference the nature of the deal was unclear. President Biden also lambasted Republicans for holding up government spending talks and said he was sick and tired of the brinkmanship after the partial shutdown of the federal government was narrowly averted. President Biden also told reporters that he hoped McCarthy had learned from the weekend back and forth, and the experience had been one of a personal revelation for the speaker. He left it up to congressional Democrats to decide whether to give McCarthy their support to keep his speakership.
The truth is, we shouldn't be here in the first place. We shouldn't have gotten here in the first place. It's time to end governing by crisis and keep your word when you give it in the Congress. You know, where I come from, when you make a deal, you give your word, you keep it. You give your word, you say, I'm going to do what I said I'm going to do, and you do it. You keep it. You keep your word. And I expect the Republican Speaker and Republicans in Congress to honor their word and keep the deal they made months ago when they tried to threaten us with almost international bankruptcy by not paying our debts. Quite frankly, I'm sick and tired. I'm sick and tired of the brinksmanship. And so are the American people. I've been doing this, you all point out to me a long time. I've never quite seen a Republican Congress or any Congress act like this. This spring, MAGA Republicans brought us to the brink, threatening to default on America's debt for the first time in over 200 years. And it would have caused a gigantic world crisis. The brinkmanship has to end, and there shouldn't be another crisis. There's no excuse for another crisis. Consequently, I strongly urge my Republican friends in Congress not to wait. Don't waste time as you did all summer. Pass a year-long budget agreement. Honor the deal we made a few months ago.
United States President Joe Biden. European Union Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell said during a visit to Kyiv on Sunday that Ukraine needed more military aid, and he promised ongoing EU support. He says, in his words, Ukraine needs more capabilities and needs them faster. In a statement on the platform called X, formerly known as Twitter, he also discussed continued EU military assistance during his first in-person meeting with Defense Minister Rustem Umerov. Now, at a news conference in Kyiv following the meeting, Mr. Borrell said that the EU will not only continue but increase its military support for Ukraine before and until the end of the year. This week, the European Defense Agency said in response to questions from news agencies that 7 EU countries had ordered ammunition under a procurement scheme to get urgently needed artillery shells to Ukraine and replenish depleted Western stocks.
Today we had the opportunity of meeting and sharing information, discussing about the situation in the ground from the military perspective, from our support to the Ukrainian army from a military point of view. I cannot tell you everything that we have exchanged, as you can understand, but it has been a meeting in order to identify the priorities of the defense minister, to tell him what we are doing, what we could do more, what are their most pressing necessities from the point of view of ammunition, training, providing arms for what kind of battle. But it shows that our support to Ukraine not only continues, but increases, or at least by the time being the proposition on the table shows that we continue. The stage will decide it together with the financial perspective before the end of the year. So let's see what's happening in the US, but from our side, we will continue supporting and increasing our support.
Now, Ukrainian military helicopter pilot, a 22-year-old individual called Ole, has become used to fly on his craft low over fields and woods to track targets in the war to destroy and evict Russian invaders. All too aware of the risks of low altitudes, he nonetheless pressed on to establish and hunt down enemy positions. In his words, yesterday was a very difficult flight. We were forced to land in a field 4 times. Missiles and guided bombs were launched at a helicopter, he acknowledged, seated at the controls of his Soviet-designed Mi-8 aircraft. He also said that flight was the one that has scared me the most, and I had the most adrenaline. But in the end, I had greater satisfaction that the target was destroyed. Ole guides his aircraft cautiously through wooded areas, barely clearing trees before opening fire. His helicopter missions, he said, target mostly infantry, but also reinforced enemy positions and sometimes vehicles, but mostly infantry. Singling out a target, he says, involves adjusting to the right or left and engaging in a hill maneuver. That means staying low with a chopper, gradually gaining altitude, launching missiles, and then turning away to either side and descending once again. And now joining us is Mr. Yinka Oyeneji, International Affairs Analyst, who joins us from out of the UK. Good to see you and welcome to the program this morning.
Good morning, and it's good to be here as well. Indeed.
President Joe Biden, we just saw in the last report, but one, saying that he was sick and tired of the brinkmanship. And this obviously was because of the government shutdown that has averted at the last minute the escape by the skin of their teeth to a proposed 17th of November stopgap measure. Before then, another vote has to be taken on whether they can fund the government. But it seems that for those who are not in support of continued U.S. aid to the war in Ukraine, they've won, because the $6 billion that was in that spending bill was extricated from it, and the bill, the supplementary one, the temporary one they have now, does not have that $6 billion for Ukraine. What does this forebode for the future?
All right. Again, for us to be able to look to the future, we probably should take a look at our past. At least that's how I choose to see things. So first of all, while I was listening to that news report, it occurred to me that there's a difference between the individual and the party's political trust in advanced countries. Whereas you may change the leadership of government, but the party trust, the party policy may remain. Now, so this problem with respect to budget did not start today. It started a long time ago. As soon as the both political parties, Republican and Democratic, were running neck on neck at the last elections, this was already envisaged. And yes, U.S. almost went bankrupt. There was a shutdown of budget because there was no agreement between these two political parties. Now, what is the political trust of the Republicans at this moment is make America great again. Whether we like it or not, Trump out of office, otherwise, that is still the political trust, putting America first. The Democrats, on the other hand, will consider trying to be pragmatic, all right? The United States retaining its status as a big brother of the world. In actual fact and in reality, United States itself needs help. Now, if we're a few months away from another general elections in the United States, it stands to reason that Republicans will continue to push their political trust, which is that U.S. should reconsider its budgetary assistance to foreign countries, regardless of the fact that we are in a war. You really do have to select your own battles. It's the same thing in the United Kingdom. UK has been in support of Ukraine with respect to supplying ammunition, high-level artillery. But at some point, you need to stabilize your economy back home and then re-strategize. I believe that this is the point of departure for both the Democrats and the Republicans in the United States. Whereas the Republicans will believe that they are going into another election, maintaining their political trust of putting America first. The Democrats may very well also stick to their guns of being pragmatic, or even play to the gallery and say we're in support of Ukraine, we'll continue to be in support of Ukraine, and on the basis of that, we expect to win over the American people towards the next elections. What does this mean for the future? It then means that at some point, warring parties in Ukraine and Russia would have to come to the table and then start to de-escalate the conflict, which has gone on for years, we can say at this point, because the resources are simply not there to continue to prosecute this war. That's what I think that the immediate future portends.
A bone of contention for the Republicans that don't support continued assistance to Ukraine, could it possibly be, I don't want to say the emperor has no clothes, but the United States is $31.4 trillion in debt, yet the United States has provided over $75 billion in military assistance to Ukraine, and they're continually gunning for more, up to $24 billion. And this $6 billion was supposed to pass in this spending bill for Ukraine. Are these some of the issues that those on the other aisle have with the Democrat Party and the Republicans that also support this continued assistance?
I think that it's major the state of the economy, and it's the same everywhere. Interestingly, the last time we discussed, I made example of major economies in the world and the problems that we are going through. Germany, even Britain, Poland at the last time. Now, this is not to say that anybody wants Ukraine to cave under the war that we are going through. But the truth of the matter is Ukraine has benefited far more than what it would have envisaged, in that it has built military might in that time. We have black holes in different budgets of those who have been supportive of the war. Even in Britain here, we have a couple of local councils and boroughs that have gone bankrupt and are selling their public assets to be able to fund necessities, their necessary obligations to their residents. In the United States, it's the same. It's a very fragile economy, with the United States being hugely indebted and then also staring bankruptcy, so to speak, in the face. So there has to be some measure to curtail this. Everybody wants the war to end. Everybody wants Ukraine to be able to stand up. But there have only been a few identified major supports for Ukraine up until this point. And at some point, there's going to be donor fatigue. And I think that is stepping in. It is political in nature to say, you know what, we've got varying degrees of indebtedness that need to be addressed. There's no doubt about that. But it's also the reality that the United States faces. The United States has always been one of the biggest debtors in the world, but it is because it has an economy that is pragmatic, that can import and export, and it's got trade rights all over. But at this point, it is inimical for the United States to continue to maintain that level of support when it is going to elections in a few months' time. So what happens? Why should the United States get into some major commitment when there may be a change in government in a few months' time? So that is why regions such as NATO would have to get to the front seat of trying to de-escalate the war. It cannot, no major support can come beyond the tranche that we have at the moment. I also said to you a short while back that nations of the world are preparing their budgetary estimates for next year. You don't want to include such huge expenditure as major fundings for Ukraine in a budget that needs to tackle climate change and climate action, and also trying to transit into a green economy of the world over. It is simply not the point at which major monetary commitments will be made to Ukraine any longer.
Speaking of building military might, which you just said in your answer just now, President Volodymyr Zelensky has signed 20 agreements with arms manufacturers from Sweden, from Turkey, Czech, Germany, France, for arms manufacture, supply of components for drones, and what have you. And this has happened in this part at this time of the war. For those who think that these companies will profiteer from the war, essentially war profiteering, they don't care whether the war comes to an end or not, because significant amounts of money is exchanging hands between them and the Ukrainian government. What's your position?
Yes, so it's one of the low-hanging fruits that the war was necessarily going to bring. We've got an adage in my own part of the country where I come from that says that when a king's palace goes up in flames, it just means that a better edifice is going to be built. One of the justifications for going to war by Russia, other than the fact that it was going to claim territories it believes rightly has, is because there would have been a need to use up all the weapons that have been stockpiled for a long time that had previously not been tested. Okay, so that's a justification. We have this, we have stockpiled these arms and ammunition, let's put them to use. We have old tanks, let's put them to use. By that way, we are gaining territories. That would have been a sound argument for Russia. That's elementary. Not to even talk about the fact that it would have helped Putin to consolidate his powers at home. That's one part of things to look at. For Zelensky could have also rolled over on behalf of Ukraine and said, you know what, we don't have the means to go to war. So you want to take Crimea, you've taken it. You want to take parts of Donetsk and all of that, it's fine. You can take it and then leave to fight another day, okay? Just fight and run away and then leave to fight another day to say, you know what, we are going to prepare quietly. But for Zelensky himself, it made him a wartime leader, which will consolidate his own political legacy in Ukraine. So he seized the moment. It was also an opportunity to be able to get military support from the world over, and that has happened. We are seeing that already. And what we should have been thinking, countries that should have benefited include my own country, Nigeria, because we've got the minerals to be able to supply warfare armaments, if you like. We've got uranium and all of that. We could have benefited from that. The grain deal and the collapse of it, we could have benefited from also exporting agricultural produce and all of that. Now, come to those who who it's their business and stock in trade, to manufacture weapons. This is their season, all right? So go to war, they are able to establish deals to supply arms and ammunition. And that's also some form of stabilizing economies all over the world. Imagine that Nigeria, for example, is able to use up or to deploy its uranium deposits and a lot of other minerals to be able to also build nuclear warheads and all of that. We have been talking earning serious foreign exchange to show up our foreign reserves. So there are benefits to conflicts. There are also unfortunate repercussions of going into conflict. It just depends on where you choose to stand. And for Ukraine at the moment, it's almost a blessing in disguise, with due respect to the lives and assets that have been lost, that it can now show up its own military might and cite Russia as an example of why nations of the world have to support it to build its military warfare. So when there's a war, you consider what is there to benefit from different perspectives, and then you also weigh the consequences and see whether it's worth the while. For Ukraine, it's garnered support in terms of military might, in terms of funding. It's been able to do that. And the gap between Ukraine and developed countries is, in terms of military might, is reducing, because it's got a dent in the UK economy and the UK reserves. It's got a dent in German reserves. It's got a dent in United States reserves. And all of a sudden, we are all putting up our tanks and military support for Ukraine. So at the end of the day, Ukraine may likely be the better for it.
And in spite of this military might that you speak of, and if you listen to NATO on the state of the counteroffensive and the Americans, for which they say there is incremental progress, President Vladimir Putin has celebrated 1 year of the annexation of Zaporizhia, Kherson, Luhansk, and the other area, Donetsk, that he took over last year, saying they have gone the way of Crimea and they want to be part of the fatherland, as he put it. What's your impression? Because this obviously is totally different from the impression the world is getting that the counteroffensive is going ahead as planned.
So there's a new word. It's not new to me, but it's become recurring in the last at least 1 month for me, and that is resilience. Going all the way in whatever we do, all right, in the political scene in Nigeria, you can see resilience, even though we had our elections February, March. In September, October, we are still talking about our elections. In the same vein, for Russia, there's resilience in the fact that it's been prosecuting this war since February last year. That's almost 2 years. And then, of course, now, what matters in terms of war is who blinks first. That's the question. I mean, it's smart, it's intelligent for Putin, even though we can say it's disingenuous for him to want to go ahead and say, we have our gains and we are going to annex those areas. Good luck to him. Do I think it will be a success? Of course not, okay? Because even Crimea, that is being talked about, has had different negative hits in the last few weeks, all right? Successful air attack on Crimea itself, let alone talk of even Ukraine right there, and he's saying that he's annexing this place and that place. I don't think that those will be sustainable in the long run. In the short term, there's even a possibility that we will see Russia saying elections have been conducted in those areas and they've elected mayors that are responsible and accountable to Russia. We may see that. It doesn't change the people who are there. They are still Ukrainians, and for whatever they say, they are still within Ukrainian territory at this time. At the end of the war, it may become part of a negotiating tactic to say, you know what, we will cede back some of these regions, not all of them, but Russia is simply bringing the goods home, okay? Launch the attacks, take the areas that you can take, go ahead with propaganda, skew the news as much as you want, saying that you occupy those territories, conduct sham elections. They are simply plans that will be on the table when negotiations begin.
Mr. Yeniji, as you reported at the beginning of the program, 40 days to the day, Yevgeny Prigozhin lost his life in that fatal plane accident, and there was a marking of it just now. But now there's a man called Andriy Troshev, who, according to the British Ministry of Defense, has had a meeting with President Vladimir Putin, possibly to create striking units. The Wagner Group, as they are constituted, aren't they going to metamorphosize into part of the advanced party of the Russian strike force? Should they be integrated into the war? Because it seems as they were the most effective fighting units of the Russians at the time that they were together under Prigozhin. So doesn't it make sense that possibly this man, Andrei Chushev, his name is, will be a replacement for Prigozhin, and that Wagner group will now come directly under the control of Putin?
Well, I saw that question coming, and I'll tell you the truth, is the most interesting for me today. I saw it coming. Now, the first answer to that, even if it's not direct to your question, is that I don't even believe that Prigozhin is dead. Personal opinion, personal views. I believe that what has happened is to help him go away, and go away quietly, and then he can enjoy his loot, which is humongous all over the world, wherever he chooses to be. Because the idea being to execute him, Putin would have made it obvious that his identity would not be in doubt. Now, we've had different enemies of the government in the last at least 24 months who have suffered different kinds of fate regarding repercussion from the government. Some have allegedly jumped to their deaths, others have been in murder suicide, killing their family members allegedly, and then also their dead bodies found. In this case, there was by no means any way to even identify that the person who has died is actually Prigozhin, okay? All we know is that he had AIDS and that there was a coup. But there was no external validation of identifying those who were victims of that crash. So personally, my personal opinion, in the hush-hush way the burial was conducted and all of that, I do not think that he is the one who has died. I suspect that it is some kind of arrangement to make him go away, all right, because he was powerful by himself. You should look at how Putin himself described him during that time. He said he was a successful international businessman. And irony, because they consider Africa as the business area where they conduct all of these illegal activities. Now we have to look at Wagner itself in Africa to be able to determine what the future course of Wagner Group itself will be. Now in Africa, I see Wagner as reducing its popularity. They may not realize that, but in Burkina Faso and a few other African states where we have experienced coup, the local military boys are taking over, all right, so that the influence of Wagner in Africa is waning, even though Wagner itself will not be able to see it. And that in all of those African states where we have experienced coup, the local military is taking over, and the Russians are subjected to them, even though they possibly helped to bring those governments into place. But Wagner is not as strong as it was, say, 6 months ago in Africa. Now, Africa also is a golden jewel in the crown of this supposedly fallen Prigozhin, in that he would not, if there's any other asset remaining for him, it will be Africa, where there's illegal exploitation, mining, and export of smuggling, if you like, of our natural resources. So you will look to Africa to be able to discover what the future holds for Wagner, because the only other foreign nation that has welcomed Wagner is possibly a neighboring country, okay, in Ukraine. Now, nobody else is welcoming Wagner all over the world. And what Wagner was set up for was to try to take resources forcefully from all over the world. Now, I do not think, even though there was a phase of it where Wagner was being incorporated into the Russian military a few weeks before that failed coup, if you like, I also see that the Russian army is trying to take over Wagner troops. But I do not think that Wagner would in an awesome manner, become part of any strike or elite force of Russia. Instead, Wagner would then have to be depleted, and also would become splinters. So there'll be different breakaway of Wagner, and then everybody chooses whether they want to go and become a Russian strike elite force. Do not even be surprised that some of them involved in the Russian army will cross over to Ukraine, and we've seen that in recent times, complete with helicopter from Ukraine and then handing themselves over to Russia. So Africa will help to answer that question. Would we still welcome all of these Wagner troops to steal our resources? Because that's what I see that they do, to steal our resources and force themselves in the guise of fighting ISIS. Africa would have to make that decision, because Wagner is only important in African context, and that is how Putin gets the resources he requires. So if Africa expels Wagner, that's the end of Wagner. That's how I see it.
We'll see what happens in the coming days and weeks ahead. Thank you for your submission. I see your point at the beginning on non-confirmation of evidence that he's dead, even though they said that they have DNA evidence that he was one of those that died in that plane crash. It just goes the same way as when Hitler perished. After all that Adolf Hitler did and all the atrocities he committed, only for us to be told that he killed himself, and all they had was dentition to prove that the remains belonged to Adolf Hitler. That was an anticlimax to end all anticlimaxes. Thank you, Mr. Oyeniji. Mr. Yinka
Thank you
Oyeniji.
also. Thank you. Happy Independence, Nigeria.
Happy Independence Day. Mr. Yinka Oyeniji joined us from the UK. You're watching live coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. Coming up, 5 new ships on their way to Ukrainian seaports using a fresh new corridor. Please stay with us. Welcome to the Soulful More stretch of today's coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. 5 new ships are on their way to Ukrainian seaports using a new corridor open to resume predominantly agricultural exports, an alternative arrangement to the Black Sea grain deal blocked by Russia. The Marine Traffic Database showed on Sunday, October the 1st. The database identified the 5 vessels heading towards the ports as the Olga, the Ida, the Forza Doria, the New Legacy, and Danny Boy. The Marine Traffic Database showed earlier on Sunday that 3 cargo vessels left Ukrainian Black Sea ports after loading, the latest to sail since Kyiv set up a temporary humanitarian corridor after Russia quit a deal allowing safe passage for Ukraine exports. The 3 bulk carriers, the Azara, the Ying Hack 01, and the Enidia, were due to load 127,000 metric tons of agricultural product and iron ore for China, Egypt, and Spain. The Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Kobrakov said last month that 3 cargo ships were heading towards Ukrainian Black Sea ports for further food and steel exports. European Union Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell visited the memory wall, that is the memory wall of fallen defenders in the Ukrainian capital Kyiv during the newly introduced Defenders Day commemorating soldiers killed in conflict on Sunday, October the 1st. Borrell met with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky as they laid flowers and honored the memory of the members of the armed forces who died for Ukraine with a minute of silence. After the service, Mr. Borrell met with wounded servicemen. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, launched on February the 24th, has killed thousands, displaced millions, pulverized cities, and damaged the global economy. NATO is temporarily deploying airborne warning and air control system surveillance planes to Lithuania, which will fly missions to monitor Russian military activity near NATO borders, a NATO spokesman said on Saturday. NATO said that for the first time, 2 aircraft will fly missions to monitor Russian military activity near the alliance's borders and could detect aircraft and missiles hundreds of kilometers away, making them a key early warning capability for NATO. Since February 2022, NATO AWACS have conducted hundreds of patrols over Eastern and Northern Europe to monitor Russian warplanes. The AWACS, from a fleet of 14 NATO-owned surveillance aircraft based in Germany, will start their reconnaissance flights in the coming days. Russia has carried out long-range airstrikes on targets in Ukraine since it invaded its neighbor last year, and Kyiv has reported suspected Russian weapons flying over or crashing into neighboring countries several times. In the most serious incident, a missile that fell near the border killed 2 people in Poland last November. Poland and NATO allies later said it was a misfired Ukrainian air defense missile.
We are here with 150 people from 16 nations to conduct surveillance sortie within the NATO airspace for 6 weeks. That's the time window allocated for the deployment at the moment. This will provide a crucial contribution to the enhanced vigilance activities that the NATO is conducting for the eastern flank.
President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Saturday he wanted to turn Ukraine's defense industry into a large military hub by partnering with Western weapons manufacturers to increase arms supplies for Kiev's counter-offensive against Russia. He was speaking at a forum his government convened with international producers to discuss how to jointly develop industrial capacity to build and repair weapons in Ukraine despite constant Russian bombardment. Ukraine critically depends on Western financial and military support and has had tens of billions of dollars of such help since the start of the Russian invasion in February 2022. But the war created a constantly growing demand for arms and ammunition. Executives from weapons producers from over 30 countries attended the forum. Some said they were depleting their stocks quickly and had struggled to find supplies to be able to ramp up production to meet Ukrainian demand. Russian President Vladimir Putin met with the military personnel who just returned from fighting in Ukraine on Friday in the Kremlin. The Kremlin says people who attended the meeting distinguished themselves with courage and heroism. 4 of Russian armed forces military personnel participated in conversation. One of them joined the meeting via video link from the Central Military Hospital. President Putin also mentioned that 2 of the fighters' comrades who had volunteered from prison were killed in Ukraine. They made mistakes, but they gave their lives for the motherland. They redeemed completely, says the Russian president. Ukrainian tank crews in eastern Ukraine see the first delivery of U.S. Abrams tanks to Kiev as a boost that will offer them more protection and firepower in battle. President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Monday that Ukraine had taken delivery of its first shipment of U.S. jet-powered Abrams tanks to help in the defense against Russia's invasion. Ukrainian tank crews training in the Donetsk region of eastern Ukraine said that once they were deployed, the Abrams tanks will be a big step from the Soviet-era tanks they've been operating. A tank commander who uses the call sign well said his team needed the additional firepower and protection offered by the Abrams and other Western tanks, such as the German-made Leopard. And joining us from southeastern region of Nigeria, Anambra State, is Mr. Vince Onyekwelu. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning.
Now, if the Russians are so bad and they're so devious and they want to strike the Ukrainians at every opportunity, why haven't they put a spanner in the works of the Black Sea grain evacuation of the ships at the corridor provided by Ukraine, for which reason there are about 4 ships that are currently going to make use of this humanitarian corridor by Ukraine? It seems as though the Russians are pretending that it's not happening.
Obviously, that is a very valid point. A lot is happening in the Black Sea region, and so many scholars of war analyses have questioned the Russians why they are a bit too nice in fighting this war. You know, apart from the Black Sea corridor, a lot of questions have been asked about things that are happening in Lviv. Lviv is one of the major cities closest to the Western world, closest to to Polish borders, and even Russian attacks in Kyiv has been kind of limited to federal government parastatals and intelligence officers. So whatever the Russians are doing in that area of the Black Sea corridor, it's either they are too nice, or it's either they don't have the warfare power or the strategies to put a cap on that so-called humanitarian corridors. I say so-called. I believe humanity is about everybody involved in the game. As much as I support Russians to allow the Ukrainians to export their grains, same way I support the Russians to be allowed to export their agricultural products also. Cannot block one person and give the other person permission. So whatever the Russians are doing in the Black Sea corridor is left for them. It could be their war strategy. It could be a weakness. But the coming days are going to tell us more stories about what's going on there.
President Joe Biden's consternation at the U.S. Congress over the government shutdown that was averted just yesterday, but which can recur by November the 17th if both parties don't come to agreement on the Ukraine aid, which has been the bone of contention, which $6 billion was removed from the current temporary measure so that the government of the United States will not shut down its services.
Honestly, there's so many questions about the financial aid that is assumed headed to Ukraine. Apart from what is going on in the USA, there is still a new issue that just came up in the EU. The EU is claiming that recently they've sent 1.2 billion euros to Ukraine, and 1.2 billion euro is about roughly 1.4 billion US dollars. So that is not peanut. And apart from saying that the money is sent to Ukraine, there is not actual clarity and transparency of what the money has been used. Because if you understand war economics, a country may say that we've sent $6 billion to Ukraine, but they will not tell you that 50% of that $6 billion we are actually giving to their own private contractors to deliver certain services to that country. At times, they give these contracts to their own individual Americans or Europeans to deliver some services to Ukraine. So it's not like they are sending the raw cash of all these billions of dollars or all these billions of euros we are hearing. At times, it's services that are given to private national contractors in Europe or in America to go and deliver to Ukraine. And at times, the accountability is not the same. That is why many people are worried that this war crime economics is not very transparent. And in conclusion, about 24 hours ago, the very important Elon Musk was on Twitter, obviously X, talking about he put a picture of someone that looks very much like Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, and was saying he doesn't look comfortable because he's not having the chance to ask for more billions of money to be sent to him. And people are castigating Elon Musk. Why is he doing that? So the bottom line is war economics, finances actually could be being abused. So not all they say that they send to Ukraine actually goes to Ukraine. Some of them are used to sponsor and fund private contractors, research and technology companies, research and development companies. It's not all about the monies, but it's about the transparency of what has been sent to Ukraine and how it's being used, because these are the monies from taxpayers' monies. It's not a private person's money.
Transparency in the disbursement of these funds, because a senator, I think representing Kentucky State, Senator Rand Paul, the United States Congress, was making a similar allegation and saying that they had pushed for an independent supervisory official, so to speak, that would monitor how these monies are being used and where it was going, and have an account of the finer points of the disbursement of this money. And it apparently that didn't receive a lot of support from the Democrats, according to him in a presentation that he made at the U.S. Congress. But let's turn our attention away now to NATO. And we just reported before we had you on that NATO said they were sending reconnaissance and observatory planes to detect how close the Russian military activity was to NATO countries' borders. Will this aggravate Russia?
Yes, yes, yes. It will aggravate Russia, and it has every reason to aggravate any serious nation is in a wartime situation. And number one, do not forget the MAD, the Memorandum of Understanding that was signed about 30, 35 years ago, that there will be no expansion of NATO towards the east of Europe. So I understand the reasons why NATO chose this period to do their reconnaissance and their observatory practices or actions in that area. And number two, it's actually on record that German tech company is about to send a Taurus. The Taurus is a wonderful smart cruise missile that can be used on F-16 aeroplanes to bomb Russian territories right deep into Russia. The Taurus is a very smart bunker buster. It's so smart that just like the Storm Shadow of the British Storm Shadow, but the Taurus is much more advanced. The Taurus can go 500 kilometers, unlike the Storm Shadow that can go about 250 kilometers. The payload of the bomb is bigger. Its technology is bigger. It's smarter than the Storm Shadow. So obviously, the role of the NATO, the role of are going to put themselves in harm's way. How do I mean? If Germany decides to send Taurus to Ukraine to be used to bomb Russians in their country, Russia is saying they also have the authority to bomb the factories from where Taurus is manufactured in Germany. It's also on record that once this happens, this may escalate this. NATO should be mindful that they don't, out of passion to support Ukrainians, they don't put people in Germany in harm's way, because once Taurus is deployed, once they are used to bomb, just the same way the English people are trying to get involved in the training of Ukrainian soldiers right now in Ukraine territory, no longer in England as it's been done before in the UK, but they are thinking about sending British soldiers go to Ukraine to train the soldiers. It puts more British soldiers in harm's way because right now there's going to be a direct attack on them. And I think we need to start to find a way to start to bring this war to a close, not actually making the war to bring in more cruise missiles. Because don't forget, once the Taurus comes on board, we may start to see the Brahma coming on board. And the Brahma is a more dangerous cruise missile, even a supersonic cruise missile. And in war, you have to defend your own. All these ideas of sorties being thrown around Russia. You know what happened in Libya? You have so many rookie pilots going on sorties against the Libyan government because they don't have the airspace. But Russians will not allow this. Many deaths are going to happen. Many lives are going to be lost.
Very well, Mr. Onyekelu, sorry to interrupt you, but just one more question for purposes of time. These weapons is exactly the reason why countries have been very vocal, some countries, about the continuous supply of weapons to Ukraine and obviously the Russian capability to make weapons. The Taurus weapons you just mentioned, it doesn't just play into the hands of the Russians who have tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus.
Oh, wonderful. That's better said by you, because once this kind of Taurus, let me break it down for you briefly. It's like in warfare, many countries will start to have their warfare systems being depleted. So a lot of munitions have been used. There is need for them to start to restock. So when, example, the president of North Korea visited Russia, the West, we are saying, why must he visit Russia? And I'm asking the West, why wouldn't he visit Russia? You in the West are trying to...
We do apologize for losing you at that time. If you're still there, Mr. Vince Onyekelu. Mr. Vince Onyekelu.
I can hear you. I can hear you.
We'll leave it there for now for purposes of time, and we thank you so much for making out the time to be with us. Mr. Vince Onyekelu, National Security Risk Strategist and a former British police officer who joined us from Anambra State in southeastern Nigeria. Happy Independence holidays to you.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Finally on the program, there are reports of fresh explosions heard in Kherson, where Russian attacks were reported this morning. The city has been frequently targeted by Russian strikes since the start of the invasion in February 2022. Earlier in the day, Regional Governor Alexander Prokudin had reported that one person was killed and 6 others were injured in overnight attacks due to Russian strikes. And that's where we leave it for today's special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Many thanks for watching. Happy Independence holidays to all Nigerians in Nigeria and in diaspora.